Okay, today I get a chance to talk to my good friend, coworker, just all-around fantastic musician, Tom Hall. Tom was first visited with us way back for podcast number 37. It was where we kind of dove in and found out what a kid from Tasmania, what the hell he was doing in LA making music and cutting max patches. And he has been doing nothing but like raising up dust ever since then. And so he's got a release coming up pretty soon. We'll have him talk about that. But with that, I'm going to say hi to Tom Hall. Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Hey, Darwin.
Thank you so much for taking the time to have a chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. I mean, it's good to be back. I'm glad I'm still alive.
Right.
Kicking, and we're here.
Yeah. So why don't you fill people in a little bit on what you're doing right now?
Right now, I'm actually kind of wrapping up an album, which feels pretty momentous. This one's been a bit of a slow burner and a real process. And that comes out June 5th, called Spectra. And I'm kind of just getting together, the kind of PR cycle that goes along with an album. And getting all the stuff out and the EPK and all of that. It's one of the more tedious things of releasing your music, I think. But nonetheless, I'm excited to get it out in the wild.
Right. Yeah. Well, you sent me the EPK to prepare for this, and I had heard one piece that you had shared earlier, but I kind of got to listen to all of the release. It's pretty amazing. But also the presentation of the press kit is pretty cool. I think a lot of people would be curious about sort of the release process. First of all, you're releasing this on CD, on downloads, and you're doing cassette releases also, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
What label is releasing this, and where are they going to be sending stuff out of?
So this is Eli Records or Elli Records out of France, and they are doing mail order on their website. If you just go to elli.media,
okay,
and they're sending out the CDs and cassettes from there. But they've a lot of discussion went into the pricing and the likes, and I think it's very reasonable pricing considering where they're sending from, and they're also including worldwide shipping. So,
okay.
I actually will only have I'll only have copies at live shows. So yeah, they're taking care of everything, and they've actually done a tremendous job in everything, the artwork, getting it together, mastering. Yeah, I'm stoked to have them. They actually found me.
Oh yeah, so, nice. Yeah.
They saw me talking about releasing something, just throwing it out there, and I was gonna, get it together myself. And this was all posted on an Instagram story.
Right.
And next thing, they're messaging me and saying, "We want to do it. We want to release it."
Oh, that's fantastic.
So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I talked to Dimitri SSC, and he was talking about one of the pains of doing self-release stuff is that for a lot of electronic music, the market for it is worldwide. But there's a lot of scenarios where people who aren't in your country have a real disincentive to get your release just because shipping costs a lot of times can exceed the cost of the release itself,
Yeah, I've actually seen that that's really come about in the last 8 to 10 years. I mean, I think late 2009, 2010, you could still ship a cassette back to Australia or vice versa for just a couple of dollars. And now it's $10, $13.
Yeah, right.
To ship a $5 cassette.
Yeah, that's crazy. Well, the other thing that's kind of rough is that there are so few distributors left for this stuff.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can get a label that has a good relationship with the distributor and build off of that. The distribution networks have just been really torn to pieces.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, as far as distribution goes, I think it might only extend as far as me taking a couple of physical cassettes around to a few record stores in Los Angeles, and that'll be about it.
Right.
Yeah, it's sad. It's especially for things that are not, kind of mainstream releases. You're just never going to get these. The remaining distributors are not going to. They're just not going to take on 100 cassettes and distribute them.
Right, exactly.
Or CD, yeah.
So when we last talked, which was back in 2014, you were kind of getting into some analog stuff. You were deep into Macs. You still were pining for the opportunity to work more on your Nord modular. The world has kind of shifted a lot for you since then. You are part of what I consider the LA modular mafia. This group of people that knows each other and plays around a lot with each other and stuff like that. You've gotten pretty active in doing performances, in fact, including some pretty heavy duty performances, but also doing releases and doing work with a lot of other people. So really, a big change has been your interaction with modular. What is it that for you that made the modular the right thing?
I think it was a few things, and I'll try and do it justice. I think it was a few things. My wife and I were living in a pretty small apartment at the time in Venice, and I had a lot of leftover gear from Australia that I'd bought to America. And it was a lot of, like a Korg Poly 800, a Moog Little Fatty, and a lot of things with key beds, and they take up a lot of space. Right. I think you saw that, actually.
Yeah, I did. The thing I mostly remember was the long stretch of Mogafogers.
Yes. And see, the funny thing is, the Mogafoga pedal was actually literally my first foray into, like, modular, because sure. I got them as these kind of like, and Lawrence English actually put me onto them as these great devices for adding kind of like character and sound to your in the box recordings by literally kind of like reamping back out through them. Uh-huh. In my exploratory nature, I noticed all of these jacks on the back and started plugging them into one another, which are all CV control jacks. And I essentially created a modular synthesizer, albeit a big and expensive one.
Yeah, right.
So I just, with the need for space, I had this realization that I could sell all of them and actually end up with a nice kind of Eurorack system for the money.
Right, and in actually smaller space. I mean, a lot of people say modular is like too space intensive, but compared to a pile of pedals, it can be pretty compact.
Yeah. So, and at the time, I was like, okay, I'm going to sell these. And then I kind of, my whole vision for building a modular system was to kind of continue to do the sound I liked, kind of explorations into granular synthesis and the likes, but do it on hardware. So like to be able to pretty much seamlessly move out of Macs in the afternoon and flip over to the hardware and kind of keep evolving the similar sound. So, Mutable Instruments had only just announced the clouds. Actually, my friend Gregory Taylor brought that to my attention. And so I actually pre-ordered it. I think it might still be the only module I've ever pre-ordered. But I wanted to assure that I had it. But also, at the time, Olivia from Mutable Instruments was still doing his own sales. Like I don't think he was even selling through. I don't think he even was selling through shops in America or anything. He was running his own shop. And he had these B stock items that he would sell. And it was insane. Like, he was selling peaks. And at the time, the American dollar was super strong against the euro. And you could pick up a peaks that literally you couldn't even understand why it was a B stock. I think maybe a trace was missing and he would fix it so it was perfect. And he would even sell them with a warranty. And the peaks would be like $50.
Oh, my God. So I remember when the branches first came out, I got one like that, and I got a B stock, and when it came, I looked at it, and I literally could not figure out what made it a B stock.
Exactly. No one, and we're not the only ones. There was a lot of people who picked them up, but I literally bought, like, just converted a few Mogafoga pedals into a lot of mutable instrument modules.
Right, sure.
I mean, at one stage, my entire case was just mutable.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was like kind of how I got into it, and it made sense in terms of space and sound. And until then, I'd had a small kind of 5U system that I'd kind of got it from a friend, Andrew Pask, through doing bits of work for him and stuff like that. I still love that system and use it a lot, actually. When I want that rich, deep analog sound, whew,
Yeah.
it punches it out. I also wanted to do that kind of more granular digital kind of exploration that I really love.
Sure. So I got a chance to listen to the album, and I would strongly recommend for the listeners to get out there and check it out. It's an amazing piece of work. One of the things I'd say is having heard your work in the past, there are some things that are very identifiably you, and there are some things that are kind of new sounding, at least to my ears. One of the things that I feel like you've done is you've kind of gone for less of a differentiation between analog and digital sounds, and everything kind of sounds like a hybrid in some way, right? And I think maybe we could even say that now is sort of like a time of the hybrids anyway, because Eurorack modular systems are getting filled with digital modules, and digital systems are doing all kinds of things to model analog gear down to the component level. And you're seeing a lot of efforts to sort of like drive each side of that chasm towards the center, right?
Most definitely.
What are some of the things that are, for you, represent hallmarks of that kind of hybrid sound? And where is it coming from on your systems?
Yeah, I mean, before this interview, I kind of just looked at all my tracks and thought about this, and I'm in the midst of kind of writing up a tell all for the album for the label, and
Okay.
yeah, it really is hybrid. I mean, hybrid is such a great way to say, and I mean something that as I get associated with Eurorack and Max, I'm okay with people knowing what tools they use, but something I always try to do sonically is just transcend the equipment. That's really important to me because I tend to work quite out, conceptually. It does bug me a little bit where I'm like, oh, that's the clouds. There's the clouds. There's a 301. There's a 101. And plus, I have these tools and I have the skills to use and swap and change from Max to modular to Nord modular to synth. So I just tend to just use the parts that I need to get the sound I'm kind of shooting for. So it's kind of really hard to pinpoint an album. If there's maybe one track where it's just like almost definitively in one instrument, is the last track, Last Retreat, which is mostly Buchla easel, but it descends into max processing at the end.
Yeah, well, that was one of the tracks that I also kind of identified as something that sort of was you were into, but kind of is really more fully explored on this release, and that's your kind of embrace of the big drone, right? Your music has always had, well, the way, and I'd like to talk about this a little bit in a minute, it's always been sort of like cinematic without using like orchestral samples, right? In many ways, it sounds like it could be orchestral, except there's no identifiable orchestral instrumentation. But this time it seems like a lot of times there was sort of like this integration of that into sort of like much even longer form drone things, where instead of in a cinematic way moving through a narrative, it would kind of land in a space and just be allowed to blossom over time, right?
Yeah.
Is that a lot of times one of the problems with drones is like it can either seem like repetitive or just stale, right? And so one of the big things in order to make a drone compelling is to find ways to sort of like have inner voices constantly moving or changing or interacting. I'm wondering with something like a buchla, which on the surface seems like a relatively simple instrument, how you can get a complex enough tone going to really pull off that kind of drone-like environment.
Yeah, it's a few things. I mean, it's that additional sequencing section of the buchla and being able to treat like the main oscillator and the modulator as separate voices.
Oh, okay.
Like a lot can really be done there to add nuances to the sound and still kind of have this underbed of drone.
Right.
And the buchla can do feedback as well. You have that external input, so you can
think about that.
Yeah, and it's this thing, I really just recently saw perhaps the first person that I've seen that I know of processing stuff. You can literally use it like I was using the old Muga Fuga pedals as a like reamping tool. You can like literally throw anything back through the buchla.
Oh, neat.
And get all that beautiful crusty circuitry character. And so what I was doing was I just, with the buchla, when I say the end of that track descended into max processing, was actually filling a buffer inside of max, delaying it in synchronicity with the rate at which I was playing, and then feeding elements of it back into the mix. So it was like kind of like using max as a glorious delay pedal.
Right.
But like feeding it back into that external input on the buchla while I was still playing. That track was just one take. I mean, I kind of ran through what I was going to play a few times, but it wasn't like it's there's no Ableton Live cut and pasting.
Right. Well, I was kind of curious though about the mechanism you go through with composition on this stuff, because on one hand, some of it sounds very composed, and on the other hand, some of it sounds like captured exploration, Right. And I'm just wondering, so like the things that sound especially composed are things where you have like one sequence line with a contrabass line underneath it that sort of like gives it implied chord changes, right?
Right.
Or some of these bigger cinematic like chordal efforts, these seem very composed, where other things seem like they could have been an improvisation that you were lucky enough to have the tape deck rolling on, right?
Right. So there's certainly those pieces on my album. I mean, one track that stands out that was very improvised was probably Vast Limitations.
Okay.
And that was like kind of I spent a whole bunch of time programming up some custom patches on the Nord Lead 2, which is like the first big boy synth I ever bought, like outside of like Casio SK1s and Korg pianos and stuff. But like the Nord Lead 2 was the first synth that I got. I was just in love with, and I still love it to bits. But I hadn't dug around on it for a while, and actually, I'm going to name drop here, but I'm fortunate enough to, through working at Cycling 74, to get to talk to some pretty amazing artists. And one guy I get to talk to semi-regularly is Sean Booth from Autechre. And Sean's great. Like 95% of the time we don't even talk about sound. We talk about random shit like politics and the likes. But we just somehow got onto the topic of our joint love of Nords, and he was raving on about the Nord Lead 2, and he actually didn't know that I had one. He was just saying what a beast it is and how it's the best of the leads, and it's phenomenal what you can get out of it if you just spend some time, like just get way off of any of the preset patches and build your own from the ground up. And it kind of just inspired me to dig into my own Nord on another level.
Right.
And yeah, I honestly was blown away with what I was able to get into. I mean, the thing is just a beast. It's kind of mind-boggling that thing came out like nearly 20 years ago.
Yeah, I know. Well, I had a Nord Lead 1 when they came out, And so, like, I'm like that group of people that's like, well, it's never been as good as the Nord Lead 1, right? What is it that about the two that that both you and Sean seem to focus on as being sort of best of breed?
Sonically, I believe sonically the lead 1 and 2 are the same. I know for a fact that the DAC conversion on the outputs is a weird, it's 14 bits.
Oh, wow.
And I believe them to be the same. The thing that the two increased polyphony, I think the first one was limited. Maybe, how did it have 8 voices maybe?
It was something like that, and then you had to buy an expander if you wanted, which nobody could even find. So most people didn't have them.
It was vaporware.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I think the Nord Lead 2 came with 16 by standard. Yeah, where it just went to crap was when they made the 2X, because they changed to 24-bit. And all of a sudden the sound was glistening and nice and clean. And yeah, I think that's what changed it. I mean, I think the 2 has kind of, there's somewhat other element. I'm not in front of it right now, but I think the 2 added a second LFO or added a mod bus or something.
All right.
There's one element extra on the 2 that
programming element.
Yeah, one programming element on the front that's different. I forget which one, but yeah, but I think the 1 and the 2 before they made the 2Xs, they're kind of in the ballpark, similar sonic character and territory.
Sure. But we kind of got into that discussion talking about the compositional technique too, and the fact that kind of drew you in. What, for you, what represents the process of composing? I mean, do you sort of do a lot of experiments that you capture and then composite it somewhere else? Or do you like score it either graphically or notationally? Or what is the process that you do to actually do the composition part of your work?
I would say 100% of the time, it always starts with improvising. It's always I don't sit down to write a specific piece in mind. I'm not a trained musician, and everything that I have learned is all mostly being self-taught.
Okay.
So it's not like I'm like, I'm going to write a piece, but it's that generally just starts off by, improvising on something, whatever takes my eye in the studio at the time, and just getting into a place where I'm sonically getting that feeling, and trying to get an emotion or like spark an emotion in myself, and then I'll extend it. Then I might write it to MIDI or lock it into a sequencer in the modular or jot it down in Ableton Live on the piano roll. But sometimes sometimes the process getting there can be very hybrid. Like sometimes I try to keep a little keyboard in front of me at the desk at all time. It's actually in front of my keyboard, a little Arturia key step.
Okay.
And it's plugged in all the time. So I can fire up Live and a plug in and have music in 10 seconds, something like that. And sometimes I like to kind of try and stay nimble with scales and chords and whatever stuff I'm teaching myself. Little ideas, I'll jot them down. I have so many Ableton projects with MIDI clips in them that I'll probably never get back to. But
right.
But at the time, that's some kind of like chord or note progression that I felt something. Sometimes that piece will get extended inside of Live. It might never get out of the box, in fact.
Right.
It might go over to Max. It might be processed by Max for Live. But then alternatively, I'm a big fan of the orthogonal devices sequencer, the 101, 102 combo.
Okay.
And that has an SD card on the 102. You can literally just pop a MIDI file on it and then load it into a snapshot on the 101, and it just has your entire MIDI sequence there. So then you can, and it's such a seamless process. Like you can then start taking those same notes and throwing it at the modular.
Interesting. So with the stuff that you're doing, it sounds like you're pretty adept at not only a lot of different bits of gear and bits of software, but also how to get stuff moved around back and forth.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself, though, in the end, gravitating towards the modular as the place where you put stuff together? Or is it literally each piece ending up in a different spot in your studio?
That's a tough question. I mean, I feel that different tools and lots of things come into play, like time. How much time do I have? How long do I want to give this piece? Because I'm admittedly still faster at working in Ableton Live or Logic than I am on the modular. I
Right.
can make something and finish it much faster there, or Max for that matter. Patch something up, but I do like that tactility of hardware and moving stuff around. I would probably get rid of all of my modular stuff and happily just live in Max for the rest of my life. But the one thing that I love about modular is that possibility of the happy accident.
Right.
And that phrase I use actually comes from my formal studies in photography. One of my favorite photographers is a German artist, Wolfgang Tillmans, who's just mind-boggling. I love a few different series of his works, and one was kind of like analog darkroom experiments, and we referred to them like he came across this, and he made this entire series of it where one day he mixed the chemicals the wrong way.
Uh-huh.
And totally messed up his photos and ended up getting this amazing effect. And he did an entire series based off of that. And he coined the phrase "happy accidents."
Interesting.
And it really stuck with me. And with modular, I feel like when I get excited when they happen, and that's what keeps bringing me back. Like I'll move a knob the wrong way. I didn't intend to. The muscle memory's off.
Right.
Or I plug a cord, I'm not paying attention, and I plug a patch lead in the wrong inlet, or the one I didn't intend to, but all of a sudden I'm getting this sound that is just lighting up my mind.
Sure. But beyond the happy accident thing, one of the things I've noticed in talking with people lately is that, and you kind of mentioned it in a sideways way, is that sometimes people are actually finding the slowing down process to being helpful artistically, right? So once you get really good at a tool, like something like Ableton Live, you can punch stuff out quick.
Yeah.
But there's something about maybe the aspect of a modular, which is like, it doesn't do anything, right? You have to patch it. You have to tweak it. You have to find the right thing. And it slows down the process, and it kind of gives different parts of your mind and different parts of your body a way to affect the music that doesn't happen when you're just really swiftly doing stuff with the mouse.
Yeah, that's very true. And I must say that on this album, there's a number of tracks that I can pinpoint where I'm like, that piece came, like that sequence and all of that started, and it was probably the track in itself was an evolution over 8 or 9 months. I'm not one of these guys who every Saturday morning wakes up and rips all the patch cords out of their modular. I have friends who are doing, some pretty phenomenal scoring work and the likes for different, Netflix and stuff. And they have to, they want to use the modular in that as their tool set for that kind of work, but they have to regularly reconfigure. And I'm fortunate that I don't have to do that. So, you say that, and I think I can pinpoint a piece in my live set right now that's not on the record that I'm just in love with the sounds and the progression, and it's inevitably going to become a track. And it's like, what? And then I can think back that it started as like a random 15-second Instagram clip like 6 months ago.
Wow.
And I think that is really slowing down is a good point because, part of my employment, I have to spend a lot of time in the box, and it is nice to like go to another part of the studio. Like my modular's away in the corner. I can't even see the computer unless I turn my head. And it's nice to just turn off and time changes. Yeah, it's certainly tends to go by seamlessly. That's for sure. Less
Sure.
distraction.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the idea of a live set, though, because this is one thing that for people who don't do modulars at all, it just seems like a ridiculous prospect. For people who mostly do modulars in their studio or at home, it just seems risky. But you do it all the time. What are the things that you do to make live performance, viable, right? Because I know, I mean, you and I both know that there are people out there doing live sets that are primarily, they look like modular sets, but they're primarily sample playback sets, right? But I
Right.
know that that is not your practice. What do you do to make it viable?
Well, it's funny. I just had this discussion with some friends last night. First and foremost, regardless of whether I'm playing a live set out of Max or the Nord lead or I'm on the modular, the possibility of failure needs to be there. For me to be excited, I need that threat of it all going to shit.
Right.
I like it's always been the case. I've been playing live now for getting close to 15 years. It's always been the case. Like, and I started in the box. I was playing live out of Ableton, but I just literally could not just make it all be clip based. I would play stuff into a looper. This was like before Ableton even had a looper. I'd managed to make a looper using a bunch of chained simple delays
Oh, no.
and feeding them back into one another.
Oh, wow.
It worked really well, actually. And it was all synced because you could sync the simple delay to clock. So it was like you could get actually a looper over a set amount of bars. But yeah, I mean, that's first for me. And then with the modular, it really is an instrument that I play. Like you can go and press you can turn the clock on and different things, but nothing happens. It's like it has to be interacted with. But I think of it like events, and I think about events a lot. And this element happens, and then this element happens, and we get to an event, and then we progress to the next event after that.
I see.
So a few real key modules in my case. I have the old IntelliGel Mutagen,
Right.
which is a 6-channel mixer which you can set A, B, or C outputs, and it has a mute button. It also has CV over mute. It's such a classic module, and there's still not really one in the current lineup of URAC that I know of that is in that kind of size and functionality. They made a remix of it, but it's bigger. It's got sliders. It's not quite the same.
Right.
And then I would say the other key element is I use the 4MS QCD linked to the QPLFO, and they're linked. And you can actually that has buttons that you can turn on and off the LFO function. And actually, the clock controls the rate of the LFO. I use the LFO to clock stuff, and so that I can turn the LFO on and off when I want to make events happen.
Oh, sure. Okay. So that's how you sort of like manage bringing things in and out.
So it gives me 4 different clocks that I can have physical control over. And when they come on, certain things happen, certain things don't happen. It starts a chain of events and the lags. And then recently, I actually went ahead. This is something I've wanted for a while. Couldn't really find it. Didn't want to fill a hole in my case with such a functionless module. But I made a little, out of a little project box, just a little momentary gate device. So basically, I got 4 switches, and when I press them down, it gives a gate high. And that also allows me to interact with the modular and turn things on and off and make processes happen.
Well, now I've seen that you've done modular gigs with relatively small systems. How do you get a variety of sounds when you have what's in essence meant to be kind of like if you're doing a skiff? How do you make a set's worth of sound out of a skip?
So I was doing this thing for a while where, I got myself a nice 12U travel rig and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And it was going along to gigs and playing these sets. And they were great. I had some really great sets. But I always would look at it and be like, shit, each time I did it, I was like, man, I'm playing a 20-minute, 40-minute set. But I realized that in the 12U case that not every module was plugged in or not every module had patch cords in it. And I was like, I don't know, it just felt silly. I'm like, I dragged all this out. I dragged all this out here and it's not even completely patched up. But also I felt like when I did completely patch it up in a live sense, it got to a point where it was almost automated or it was either automated or it was such a bowl of multicolored spaghetti that it just was it wasn't even fun to interact with.
Okay.
What happened was good friends Eric Cheslick and Bana Huffer, Modular on the Spot, asked me to play. This is literally years ago now. And I was like, I'm not taking a 12U rig down to the LA riverfront, right? Yeah. I'm like, I'm just going to pair it back to a little 6U. And I turned up the little, pretty small 6U, 100 HP, little DIY case I'd made. And Eric was like, whoa, you've come down with just 6U. And then I had such a great set. It's still a kind of highlight set. It was so fun. And I pretty much haven't played out with more than 6U cents. So my case is 7U. I have a row of IntelliGel Quadrats.
Oh, okay.
And I also have a little line out section that IntelliGel makes that allows you to mix out to a line level pedal, which I still go out to my beloved Rat distortion pedal.
4 years later, man, it's that was one of the things we talked about back in podcast number 37, and it still is there, huh?
Still love that little Pro Rat. I mean, there's just something about it. It just lights up my brain when I fire that thing into gear. I don't know. Maybe it's that deep love of hair metal from growing up in Tasmania. But life's not real unless you have a couple of distortion pedals hanging around still.
Well, for doing live stuff, what other things do you have external to the modular? Do you use an external reverb? Do you use a looper? Do you use external sequencers, any of that stuff?
No, but I have been finalizing kind of a live set to support that album and got a whole bunch of shows coming up. And I'm integrating Max via picked up a little Soundcraft. Soundcraft made a new notepad series that has a USB 2-channel out, 2-channel back in.
Oh, okay.
So you can route audio and send audio out to the USB and get it back in. I've also been doing that with the ES8, the Expert Sleepers, into Max as well. Mm-hmm. And so that's becoming part of the process. So there'll be a laptop on stage.
Oh, shame on you.
Yeah, I know. So bad.
Shame.
I can't forget where my roots, man. Right. I started in the box. GarageBand 2003. Right. That and the Eventide H9 pedal is kind of pretty amazing. I mean, I've been using that. There's a couple of things on there that are amazing. I love the Ultra Tap. They also do it in a plugin, which is kind of cool because I can use the plugin on the computer and get an idea what it can do, and I go over to the pedal and whoa, it works exactly the same. That's kind of fun.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, maybe it comes from my years of doing, DIY MySpace book tours through Europe where I'd play every night. And literally I was the band and the roadie and everything all rolled into one. Right. But I just not a fan of the times I have dragged out big amounts of gear. It's not being fun. I'm generally like, wow, I could have done that with a lot less,
Sure, right.
I like compact.
No, that sounds true, except I think in the studio, First of all, this idea of like what the Turbo Rat brings for you, I think that you see that in other stuff where it's sort of like you want to be like tiny, but you're willing for a couple of like key pieces of technology, you're willing to go big, right? And the other place that I know that that's true for you is your love of cassettes and cassette technology.
Yep. Yep.
What is it? First of all, what do you use for cassette machines?
For me, it's a combo of like I do love that little Fostex X12. It's so janky and it looks like, I feel like it's like one step off of being in a 99-cent store or something. But the beauty of it, and until recently, you could pick them up for like a dime, and they're fun little boxes. So I don't feel too precious about them. I'll get in there and hold my finger on the motor and manipulate the tape physically and all sorts of things like that, and not feel too worried about burning stuff out.
Right.
And then I have the Tascam 414, which is kind of a classic. And in recent times, I managed to get hold of the old studio unit, the Tascam 122 Mark III, which has the kind of XLR in and outs, and that thing's that's like tape on another level.
I remember back in my studio days, I always hated dealing with cassettes because, clients always wanted to take cassettes of their work home to check it out and stuff.
Right.
I hated them until we got that machine. It was such a solid thing. It worked perfect. It sounded great. The other day, I was kind of like sniffing around. I was like, I could use one of those in my rack. The prices of them are starting to rack up. It's kind of crazy.
I think if you want any of that hardware right now, it's just got to jump on it right now because the thing is they're not making them anymore, and they are going to keep going up. Like it seems like people are reversing. They're less concerned with fidelity. There was a real, everyone was so like, it must be 24-bit. It must be 96K.
Right.
You're not even playing ball if it's not. Like, people are less concerned with it right now, and I think that's going to stay around for a while. I mean, we've reached that point with technology and DSP where, we can have pristine for days, but it's sometimes more interesting to introduce, flaws and character, and the unexpected can happen with tape.
Yeah, and indeed. Well, also, it kind of has that life. So, again, when I hear some of your stuff that's dronier or like the cinematic stuff, I think in addition to all the other modulations that you're making, it also seems like there's just like the imperfections of tape and stuff like that just add to the quality of that. It makes it so those things are more enjoyable to listen to.
It's very true. In fact, I when I got a copy of the cassette of the album and listened, I hadn't done this. I sent the masters off digitally to the label, and I got the cassette and I was like, well, I should play it to see what it sounds like.
Right.
And certainly there was definitely new like I knew the tracks so well. I'd spent so much time with them before they got sent off, and I was kind of surprised, in a good way, the kind of nuances and character that had been brought to the party just by putting it onto cassette.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. I'm pretty interested in that DIY quality of playing around with that kind of element.
Sure. Well, Tom, I can't believe it, but our time is already pegged here. But before I let you go, I'm curious. You've got this release coming out, which I'm sure once it's out there, you're going to want to take a nap. But then when you wake up, what's next on the horizon for you?
Yeah, so really just wanting to get out there, and I kind of have had live shows on hold a little bit. The start of this year, it's been pretty busy with a whole bunch of different projects on the boil, and I'm quite excited because I feel like this is like a definitive moment. I haven't had a release since like 2013 or something. So it's really nice to have something that's going to go out there that I feel like it's got resolve. It's an extension of where I'm at right now creatively. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to follow that up with a bunch of live shows, and I'm playing in New York on June 2nd at Outpost Artist Resources as part of a festival called Confetti Machine, which is a pretty amazing name for a festival.
It's pretty great.
And it's kind of a multimedia, real-time arts, sound, noise. It's really a hybrid festival, so it's kind of like perfect spot for me, actually.
Unfortunately, that when people hear this, that will have been yesterday, but
But yeah, LA album launch show is in the works for Los Angeles. It's not wrapped up yet, but I've kind of like got things at a point now, both with my live visuals, which I make in Max, where I'm really kind of wanting to just get these kind of more, and I feel like these things need to be on a larger scale. So I'm like trying to get them into bigger venues.
That's fantastic.
And make it kind of more immersive, sonically and visually for the audience.
Well, frankly, I wish we had time to talk more about the visual end on this, because this is something that's becoming a growing part of what people are expecting when they go to a gig. But we'll have to save that for the next time we talk.
Yeah, we'll come back around another 4 years or so. We'll see where we're at.
Hopefully it's sooner than that. But hey, man, I want to thank you so much for taking the time again. This was a lot of fun. It was always, as always, great to catch up and hear how you're doing what you're doing.
Likewise. Thanks for having me, Darwin.
All right. Bye. Okay. Many thanks to Tom Hall for hanging out and talking smart about his work, particularly this new release called Spectra. It's going to be out on elli.media, elli.media. The release number is EL06, and it's going to be released on June 5th, 2018. I've gotten a chance to hear an early version of it, and I found it quite stunning. To me, it's, in addition to being from Tom, a good friend of mine, it's just clearly one of the releases of the year. It's fantastic. He's already getting a lot of attention for it. So do yourself a favor and check it out. It's worth learning about. Beyond that, I want to thank you, the listeners, for showing up. Again, our numbers have been fantastic. We're getting listenership that I never would have thought possible. But as always, I would ask that if you could reach out on whatever platform you normally listen on, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, if it's YouTube or Spotify, whatever, if there's a way for you to give it a thumbs up or a like or a big smiley face of some sort, if you could do that, that'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks also to all the friends out there that are helping this thing spread. People like Synthtopia, my friends at Cycling, and other places like that. Super helpful. I really appreciate it. With that, I'm going to let you go. Catch you next time around. Bye.